In the gleaming heart of Manhattan, where success was measured in square footage and stock prices, 31-year-old Thad Blackwood stood at his office window, his distinctive jade-green eyes reflecting off the glass as he gazed at the city below. The young CEO of Blackwood Innovations had everything money could buy, yet the emptiness in his penthouse apartment matched the void in his heart. His eyes, with their unusual starburst pattern around the pupils, a shade of green so vivid it seemed almost otherworldly, were the only inheritance he had from parents he never knew. The morning sun cast long shadows across his minimalist office as he reviewed the latest acquisition proposals. Thad had built his tech empire from nothing, turning a college startup into a billion-dollar company before his 30th birthday. Yet today something felt different. The usual thrill of closing deals and crushing competitors seemed hollow, like echo chambers in his vast empty life. His assistant, Maria Rodriguez, had noticed his distraction lately, though she knew better than to mention it. She'd worked with him long enough to recognize when her boss was wrestling with something beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. Thad's morning routine was a well-orchestrated symphony of efficiency, a green smoothie, he'd never admitted it matched his eyes, a series of video conferences with international partners, and a brief meeting with his board of directors where his piercing gaze often did more to convince them than his words. But this particular Tuesday would shatter the carefully constructed walls he'd built around himself. He just didn't know it yet. As he strode through Central Park during his rare lunch break, another attempt to follow his wellness coach's advice about connecting with nature, the spring breeze carried the sound of children's laughter from a nearby playground. Normally, Thad would have walked past without a second glance, his mind already on his next meeting. But a small voice, clear as a bell, cut through his thoughts. "Watch this, Miss Andrews. I can go higher." The voice belonged to a little girl on the swings, her hair flying wild in the wind, her face tilted toward the sky with pure joy. And then she looked down directly at him and Thad's world stopped spinning. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. They were his eyes, down to the distinctive starburst pattern that had made him so recognizable in business magazines. The same jade-green shade that had always made him stand out in a crowd. The same eyes that stared back at him from his mirror every morning. For a moment he forgot how to breathe. The little girl noticed his stare and waved, completely unaware that she had just turned someone's world upside down. Her teacher, Miss Andrews, called out, "Careful, Aurora." Aurora? The name hit him like a physical force. Thad stood frozen on the path, his expensive Italian shoes rooted to the spot, as his analytical mind raced through possibilities and probabilities. The girl, Aurora, couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Her features, now that he studied them, held echoes of something familiar, something that stirred long-buried memories. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Back in his office, Thad couldn't focus on the merger documents sprawled across his desk. His mind kept returning to those eyes, Aurora's eyes, and the questions they raised. He'd been told he was abandoned at birth, left at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston with nothing but a blanket and a name scrawled on a piece of paper. The social workers had tried to trace his family, but the trail had gone cold decades ago. He'd stopped looking years ago, channeling all that frustrated energy into building his empire instead. Maria noticed something was off when he asked her to cancel his afternoon meetings. Something he'd never done before. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. Thad merely nodded, already pulling up private investigator contacts on his phone. He'd used their services before for business background checks, but this was different. This was personal. He called Preston Drake, the most discreet investigator he knew. "I need information about a student at Central Park Elementary," Thad said, his voice barely containing his urgency. "A girl named Aurora. She'd be around 9 years old." He described the encounter, the distinctive eyes, and his suspicions. Preston listened quietly, then warned him about the delicacy of investigating a minor. "We'll need to be extremely careful, Mr. Blackwood. If she is who you think she might be, there are proper legal channels we need to follow." That night, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Thad found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, looking through his adoption records. The manila envelope was worn at the edges, having traveled with him from foster home to foster home, then to college and finally to his current life. Inside were the usual documents: medical records, social worker reports, and a single photograph of him as a baby. But what caught his eye this time was something he'd overlooked before: A small note about a possible sibling case that had been closed due to lack of information. His hands trembled as he read the faded text. There had been rumors of another child, but nothing concrete had ever been found. The timing would be wrong for Aurora to be his sister. She was too young, but could she be related to him in some other way? A niece perhaps? The thought that he might have family out there, that his eyes weren't just a genetic anomaly but a thread connecting him to someone else, kept him awake long into the night. The next morning, Preston's preliminary report arrived in his encrypted email. Aurora's full name was Aurora Grace Winters. She lived with her mother, Charlotte Winters, in a modest apartment in Brooklyn. No father was listed on her birth certificate. Charlotte worked as a freelance graphic designer, making enough to get by but nothing close to Thad's wealth. The report included a school photo of Aurora, and seeing those eyes again even in a photograph made his heart race. As Thad reviewed the information, his CFO, Jackson Bennett, burst into his office with urgent news about their latest acquisition target, TechFusion Corporation. "They're trying to back out of the deal," Jackson announced, his face red with frustration. "Their board is getting cold feet about the merger." Normally, this would have commanded Thad's full attention. TechFusion was a key piece in his company's expansion plans. But for the first time in his career, business seemed secondary to the mystery unfolding before him. "Handle it," Thad said simply, surprising both Jackson and himself. "Give them what they want, within reason. Just get it done." Jackson stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. The Thaddeus Blackwood he knew never backed down from a negotiation. But the Thaddeus Blackwood he knew had never seen a little girl with his eyes playing on a swing set in Central Park either. The following week, Thad found himself doing something entirely out of character. He started taking regular walks through Central Park during lunch hour. He told himself it was just to clear his head, but his feet always carried him past the same playground. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of Aurora with her class, her laughter carrying across the park as she played with her friends. She had a confidence about her that reminded him of himself, the way she'd naturally take charge of games and organize her classmates into teams. During one of these walks, he overheard Aurora telling her friends about her upcoming science fair project. She was building a miniature solar-powered car, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as she explained her design. Thad couldn't help but smile. At her age, he'd won his school's science fair with a similar project. The coincidence made his chest tight with emotion. Charlotte Winters, Aurora's mother, often picked her up from school. Thad observed her from a distance, trying to place her face in his memories. She was around his age, with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile that her daughter had inherited. But it was Aurora's other features, the sharp intelligence in her jade-green eyes, the determined set of her jaw, that seemed to come from somewhere else. From his side of whatever family tree connected them. Preston's deeper investigation had revealed more details about Charlotte's past. She'd grown up in Boston, not far from the hospital where Thad had been abandoned. She'd moved to New York 8 years ago, shortly before Aurora was born. The timing nagged at Thad, but Preston couldn't find any direct connection between Charlotte and Thad's adoption case. The trail seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Meanwhile, the TechFusion merger was becoming more complicated. Jackson had managed to keep them at the table, but their demands were growing increasingly unreasonable. During a particularly tense video conference, one of TechFusion's board members made a snide remark about Blackwood Innovation's cold, corporate culture. The comment struck Thad harder than it should have. Was that really how the world saw his company? Was that how they saw him? That evening, as he sat in his office long after most employees had gone home, Maria brought him a cup of his favorite green tea. She'd been with him since the early days of the company, had watched him build everything from scratch. "You seem different lately," she said, setting the tea on his desk. "Not in a bad way. Just more human." Thad looked up at her, surprised by her candor. "Is it that obvious?" he asked. Maria smiled knowingly. "Only to those who've known you long enough." He found himself telling Maria about Aurora, about those familiar eyes and all the questions they raised. To his surprise, instead of cautioning him about privacy concerns or legal implications, she simply listened. When he finished, she said something that would change his approach entirely. "You know, Mr. Blackwood, sometimes the direct path is the best path. Have you considered simply introducing yourself to her mother?" The idea was terrifying in its simplicity. No more surveillance, no more private investigators, no more walking past the playground hoping for glimpses of answers. Just a straightforward conversation with Charlotte Winters. But what would he say? How do you tell someone you think their child might be connected to your long-lost family? How do you explain that you're not just some wealthy stranger with an odd fixation, but someone genuinely searching for answers. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. After a sleepless night weighing Maria's advice, Thad decided to make his move, but not before doing something unprecedented. He called an emergency board meeting at Blackwood Innovations and announced a new company-wide initiative, Family First, a comprehensive package of family-friendly workplace policies including extended parental leave, flexible scheduling, and on-site childcare facilities. His board members were stunned, but when he explained how this would help them attract and retain top talent, they reluctantly agreed. Only Maria understood the true catalyst for this sudden change of heart. The next afternoon, Thad waited near Central Park Elementary's pickup area, his usual impeccable suit replaced with more casual attire, though his idea of casual still involved a $1,000 blazer. He watched as Charlotte arrived, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder, clearly coming straight from a client meeting. Before he could approach her, Aurora came bounding down the school steps, clutching a paper with a big red A+ marked at the top. Mom, I got the highest grade on my science project. Aurora's voice rang out with excitement. Her eyes, those striking jade green eyes with their distinctive starburst pattern, were bright with pride. Charlotte swept her daughter into a warm hug, and Thad felt like an intruder witnessing their intimate moment. But he'd come too far to back away now. Taking a deep breath, he approached them. "Excuse me, Ms. Winters?" His voice was steady though his heart raced. Charlotte turned, instinctively pulling Aurora closer, a mother's protective instinct. "Yes? Do I know you?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, trying to place his familiar face. "I'm Thaddeus Blackwood," he began, then realized his name might mean nothing to her. I noticed something about your daughter that I think we should discuss." The moment the words left his mouth, he realized how suspicious they sounded. Charlotte's expression hardened, and she stepped in front of Aurora. "What exactly do you want?" she demanded, reaching for her phone. Aurora peered around her mother, her green eyes meeting Thad's identical ones with curious recognition. "Mom," she said, tugging at Charlotte's sleeve, "he has eyes like mine." Charlotte froze, her gaze darting between her daughter's eyes and Thad's. The same unusual shade of green, the same distinctive pattern that she'd never seen on anyone else, until now. The color drained from her face as she whispered, That's not possible." But it was possible, and they all knew it. The evidence was staring them in the face. "I was abandoned at St. Mary's Hospital in Boston," Thad said quietly, careful to keep his distance to avoid alarming them further. 31 years ago. I've been searching for my family my entire life, and I've never seen anyone with eyes like mine until I saw Aurora in the park last week." Charlotte's hand trembled as she gripped her phone tighter, but she didn't call for help. Instead, she asked a question that surprised him. "Do you know the name Eleanor Grace?" The name sent a jolt through Thad's system. Eleanor Grace had been written on the scrap of paper left with him at the hospital. He'd always assumed it was his mother's name, but decades of searching had turned up nothing. "How do you know that name?" he demanded, his composure cracking for the first time. "We should talk," Charlotte said finally, her voice heavy with unspoken revelations. "But not here. Not in front of—" She glanced at Aurora, who was watching their exchange with intense fascination. "There's a coffee shop around the corner. Aurora has dance class in half an hour. Can you wait until after I drop her off?" Thad nodded, hardly trusting himself to speak. After 31 years of searching, after building an empire to fill the void of his unknown origins, answers were finally within reach. As he watched Charlotte and Aurora walk away, promising to return shortly, he pulled out his phone and canceled his evening meetings. Whatever revelations awaited him at that coffee shop, he knew his life would never be the same after today. The coffee shop was quiet for a New York afternoon, with just a few customers tapping away on laptops in corners. Thad chose a secluded table near the back, ordered a green tea he wouldn't drink, and waited. His mind raced through possibilities. Was Eleanor Grace Aurora's grandmother? His mother? The connection he'd been searching for all these years? The bell above the door chimed, and Charlotte walked in, looking both determined and apprehensive. She ordered a coffee but didn't touch it once it arrived. Instead, she pulled out an old photograph from her bag and placed it on the table between them. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded, but the image was clear. Two young women, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. One of them had the same distinctive green eyes that Thad saw in his mirror every morning. Eleanor Grace, Charlotte said softly, tapping the woman with the green eyes. She was my older sister. Thad's world tilted on its axis. Was, he managed to ask, his throat tight. Charlotte nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. She passed away when I was 19, a car accident. But before that, she took a shaky breath. Before that she had a baby, a little boy. Their eyes met across the table, and the weight of understanding passed between them. You're my nephew, Charlotte whispered. Eleanor's son. The revelation hit Thad like a physical force. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Why? He asked, a lifetime of questions contained in that single word. Why did she give me up? Why didn't anyone look for me? Charlotte's face crumpled with old grief and guilt. We did look for you. Eleanor never wanted to give you up. She was only 16 when she had you. Our parents, your grandparents, forced her to put you up for adoption. They were powerful people in Boston, obsessed with their reputation. But Eleanor, she fought them. She left you at the hospital with her name, hoping you'd find her someday. Charlotte wiped away tears as she continued. When she turned 18 she started searching for you. But the adoption records were sealed, and our parents had used their connections to make sure they stayed that way. It destroyed her. After the accident, I continued the search, but by then, she gestured helplessly, the trail had gone cold. Until Aurora was born. Thad's head snapped up. Aurora? Charlotte nodded slowly. When she was born with those eyes, Eleanor's eyes, I knew she had to be connected to you somehow. I hired private investigators, but you'd changed your name from the one given at the hospital. You were already becoming successful, already Thaddeus Blackwood instead of the baby boy named Theodore Grace. The pieces were falling into place, but they revealed a picture more complex than Thad had imagined. Aurora's father, he said, connecting the dots. He was your half-brother, Charlotte confirmed. James Grace. Eleanor had another child years after you with a different father. He and I, we fell in love in college. But he died before Aurora was born. The same genetic heart condition that took Eleanor. Thad sat back, overwhelmed. He wasn't just Aurora's uncle, he was her father's brother. All this time, building his empire of glass and steel, his family had been out there. Some had been searching for him, some had been lost, and one, a bright-eyed little girl with his eyes, had been growing up just across the city. Does Aurora know any of this? He asked finally. Charlotte shook her head. She knows about her father, about Eleanor, but not about you. I couldn't tell her about the uncle we couldn't find. It hurt too much. She reached across the table and grabbed his hand, surprising them both. But now we can change that. If you want to. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. That evening, as Thad sat alone in his penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below seemed different somehow, less cold, more like stars guiding him home. He held the photograph Charlotte had insisted he keep, studying Eleanor Grace's face, seeing his own features reflected in his mother's smile. His phone buzzed with urgent messages about the Tech Fusion merger, but for once, business could wait. He had a more important call to make. Maria? I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon, he said when his assistant answered. And I want you to start researching the best private schools in Manhattan. Also, get me information about property values in family-friendly neighborhoods. There was a pause before Maria replied, Does this mean what I think it means, Mr. Blackwood? He could hear the smile in her voice. It means I'm finally going to be the uncle I should have been all along. The next day, Charlotte brought Aurora to the park after school. They sat on a bench while Aurora played nearby, and Charlotte told her daughter the truth, about her Uncle Thad, about Eleanor, about how their eyes were a family legacy that had finally brought them together. Aurora listened with the intense focus that Thad was beginning to recognize as another family trait, her jade-green eyes growing wider with each revelation. When Charlotte finished, Aurora turned to Thad and asked with disarming directness, So you're really my uncle? The one who lives in that super tall building. She pointed to the Blackwood Innovations Tower that dominated the skyline. Thad nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. Yes, I am. And I'd like to be part of your life, if that's okay with you and your mom. Aurora considered this with all the seriousness a 9-year-old could muster. Do you know anything about science? Because I'm building a solar-powered car for the science fair, but the motor keeps sticking. Thad couldn't help but laugh. Actually, I won my school science fair with a solar-powered boat when I was your age. Aurora's eyes lit up. Really? Can you help me with mine? Mom tries, but she's better at art stuff. Charlotte watched their interaction with a mixture of joy and trepidation. We need to take this slowly, she cautioned. There's a lot to figure out. She was right, of course. Their lives couldn't simply merge overnight. There were legal considerations, trust to be built, relationships to be carefully nurtured. But as Thad watched Aurora demonstrate her science project's motor problems, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to make this work. Later that week, during a board meeting about the Tech Fusion merger, Thad surprised everyone by completely restructuring the deal. Instead of a hostile takeover, he proposed a collaborative partnership that would preserve jobs and foster innovation. Sometimes, he told the stunned board members, family is more important than empire. Jackson nearly choked on his coffee at hearing these words from the famously ruthless CEO, but Maria simply smiled knowingly. That weekend, Thad did something he'd never done before. He went shopping for toys. His vast penthouse, always meticulously organized, soon had a corner dedicated to science kits, engineering toys, and a specially designed workbench sized for a 9-year-old. He hired contractors to convert one of his spare rooms into what he called the Innovation Lab, complete with safety equipment and age-appropriate tools. When Aurora saw it for the first time, her eyes shining with excitement, Thad finally understood what his wealth was truly for. The next few weeks brought changes that neither Thad nor Charlotte could have anticipated. Word of their connection leaked to the press, likely through someone at Tech Fusion trying to explain Blackwood's sudden change in negotiation tactics. The headline, "Tech Billionaire Discovers Secret Niece," splashed across New York's tabloids, turning their private family reunion into public spectacle. Paparazzi began camping outside Aurora's school, forcing Charlotte to temporarily switch her to remote learning. Thad was furious. He'd spent years cultivating media attention for his business achievements, but this was different. This was family. He immediately hired top-notch security for both Charlotte and Aurora, and his legal team worked overtime filing injunctions against the more aggressive photographers. "I'm so sorry about this," Thad told Charlotte over an emergency coffee meeting. "I should have anticipated the media attention." But Charlotte surprised him with her resilience. "You know what Aurora said this morning?" She said, "Mom, now everyone at school knows I'm related to someone who builds cool stuff like I do. She's not bothered by the attention. She's proud of being connected to you." The media frenzy had an unexpected benefit. It caught the attention of their estranged grandparents in Boston. The elderly couple, now in their 80s, reached out through their lawyers. They wanted to meet, to explain, to make amends. Charlotte was hesitant, the wounds of their past actions still fresh, but Thad was curious. "They're the only ones who can tell us more about Eleanor," he pointed out. "About who she was before, everything." Meanwhile, Aurora's science fair project was coming along beautifully under Thad's guidance. Their weekend work sessions in the Innovation Lab became sacred time. No phones, no business calls, just uncle and niece exploring the mysteries of solar power and electric motors. Charlotte often sat in the corner, sketching them as they worked, capturing the matching look of concentration in their jade-green eyes. During one of these sessions, Aurora asked the question Thad had been dreading, "Uncle Thad, why didn't you find us sooner?" Her small hands continued tinkering with the solar panel as she waited for his answer. Thad set down his tools, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes," he began, "when people are hurt, they build walls to protect themselves. I built my company into a wall so high that even family couldn't find me. But you know what?" Aurora looked up at him. "What?" "The best thing about walls is that they can be torn down. Sometimes all it takes is a little girl with the right kind of eyes to see through them." The Tech Fusion merger was finally completed, but on dramatically different terms than originally planned. Instead of absorbing the company, Blackwood Innovations established a partnership that included a new educational technology division. Its first project? A series of accessible science kits for elementary schools, inspired by a certain 9-year-old solar car design. When the press asked about the surprising shift in business strategy, Thad simply said, "Sometimes the best innovations come from seeing the world through fresh eyes." The decision to meet their grandparents weighed heavily on both Thad and Charlotte. They agreed to a private meeting at Thad's penthouse, away from prying eyes and media speculation. Aurora would stay with Maria, who had become a trusted confidant to the whole family, organizing a special coding workshop to keep the young inventor occupied during the potentially emotional encounter. Harrison and Margaret Grace arrived precisely on time, their wealth evident in their bearing but diminished by age and regret. Margaret gasped audibly when she saw Thad. He was the spitting image of Eleanor at his age, those distinctive eyes a mirror of her daughter's. Harrison, once a towering figure in Boston society, seemed smaller now, his shoulders bent under the weight of decades of guilt. "We thought we were protecting the family name," Margaret began, her voice trembling. "We were wrong. So terribly wrong." She opened her handbag and pulled out a small wooden box. "Eleanor kept this hidden in her room. We found it after we lost her. We should have given it to you years ago, Charlotte, but we couldn't face our own shame." Inside the box were dozens of letters Eleanor had written to her son but never sent, each dated meticulously, spanning from his birth until just days before her accident. There were also photographs, Eleanor at 16 holding baby Thad, her green eyes bright with tears and love. Hospital bracelets. A tiny knit cap. The pieces of a life that should have been shared, not hidden away. Charlotte reached for Thad's hand as Harrison spoke. "We drove her away with our pride and our rules. When she had James we tried to make amends but the damage was done. She never trusted us again. She was right not to." He turned to Thad, his voice breaking. "Your mother was the bravest person I've ever known. She never stopped loving you, never stopped looking for you. We were the cowards." Thad sat silently, absorbing the weight of these revelations. The letters in the box represented everything he'd ever wanted to know about his mother, her thoughts, her dreams, her love for him. But they also represented 31 years of loss that could never be reclaimed. "I need time," he said finally, "to read these, to process all of this. I'm not saying no to a relationship, but I need time." That evening, after the Graces left, Thad and Charlotte sat in his living room, the box of letters between them. "Should we read them together?" Charlotte asked softly. Thad nodded, unable to speak. They started with the first letter, dated the day after he was born. "My dearest Theodore," Eleanor had written, "I'm writing this from my hospital bed watching you sleep. You have my eyes, little one, and I pray that someday they'll help you find your way back to me." As they read through the night, a portrait emerged of Eleanor Grace, a young mother forced to give up her child, a sister who protected Charlotte from their parents' rigid expectations, a woman who never stopped hoping for reunion. In one of the final letters, dated just before her accident, she wrote about James, "I have another son now, but my heart has never forgotten its firstborn. Sometimes I look into James's eyes, so different from yours, and wonder if he would have been friends. Brothers should be friends." The letters changed everything. They weren't just a connection to the past, they were a blueprint for the future. Eleanor's words, preserved in ink and love, showed them how to be the family she had always dreamed they would be. That night, Thad made a decision that would alter the course of not just his life, but his entire legacy. The next morning, Thad called an emergency meeting with his board of directors. The normally austere boardroom was tense with anticipation as he laid out his new vision for Blackwood Innovations. "Effective immediately," he announced, "I'm establishing the Eleanor Grace Foundation, funded with 20% of my personal shares in the company. Its mission will be twofold: supporting young single mothers in continuing their education, and helping separated families reunite." Jackson nearly fell out of his chair at the announcement, but Maria beamed with pride. The foundation would be worth billions, a fitting tribute to the mother who never stopped searching for her son. But Thad wasn't finished. "Additionally, I'm restructuring my work schedule. I'll be taking Wednesday afternoons and Fridays off to spend time with my family." This time, several board members actually did protest, but Thad's jade-green eyes flashed with a determination they all recognized. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a declaration. That afternoon he invited Charlotte and Aurora to his penthouse for dinner. As Aurora excitedly showed Maria her now-completed solar car, Thad turned to Charlotte. "I want to buy you a house," he said without preamble. "Near here in a good school district. Before you protest, it's not charity. It's what Eleanor would have wanted. And," he hesitated, "I'd like to set up a trust for Aurora's education. The kind of trust that covers everything from science camps to college and beyond." Charlotte started to object, but Thad pulled out one of Eleanor's letters. "Listen to this," he said, reading from the worn page. "If you ever find this, my son, remember that family isn't just about blood, it's about choices. Choose to be there. Choose to make up for lost time. Choose love over pride." "I'm making that choice, Charlotte. Let me do this. Not because you need it, but because I need to do it." Aurora bounded over, interrupting the emotional moment. "Uncle Thad, I got into the citywide science fair. Will you come? It's on a Friday." She trailed off, knowing his usual work schedule. Thad scooped her up, not caring that her hands were covered in motor oil. "I wouldn't miss it for anything. Fridays are officially Aurora days now. Her eyes, so like his own, so like Eleanor's, lit up with joy. Later that night, after Charlotte and Aurora had gone home, Thad sat in his office reading more of Eleanor's letters. One passage particularly struck him. "I dream of you growing up to be successful, my boy, but remember that true wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in the eyes of those who love you, in the moments you choose family over fortune, in the legacy you leave not of money but of love." He looked around his expansive office, at the awards and accolades that had once seemed so important. They paled in comparison to Aurora's crayon drawing now proudly displayed on his desk, or the family photograph from the 1990s showing a teenage Eleanor with her newborn son. His empire of glass and steel was impressive, but his true inheritance had been those distinctive green eyes, eyes that had finally led him home to the family he never knew he had. The citywide science fair was held in a massive convention center, with hundreds of projects displayed by young inventors from across New York. Aurora's solar-powered car sat proudly at her assigned table, its sleek design and innovative features drawing attention from judges and spectators alike. But what really caught everyone's eye was her unexpected cheering section. A CEO in a perfectly tailored suit, his sister-in-law with her artist sketchbook, and his entire executive team, all wearing custom t-shirts that read Team Aurora in glittering green letters. Maria had orchestrated the surprise, convincing the board members and key executives to show up in support. Even Jackson, who had initially been the most resistant to Thad's changes, stood there beaming as Aurora explained her project's environmental impact calculations they had worked on together during one of his unexpected visits to the innovation lab. When Aurora won first place in her division, Thad's thunderous applause was matched only by his tears of pride. As she accepted her trophy, her jade-green eyes sparkling under the stage lights, he saw Eleanor in her smile, James in her confident stance, and something uniquely Aurora in the way she immediately started explaining to the judges how she could make her design even better. The celebration dinner afterward was held in a private room at Aurora's favorite pizza place, a far cry from the Michelin-starred restaurants where Thad usually entertained clients. Charlotte watched in amusement as her brother-in-law, still in his expensive suit, showed Aurora how to properly fold a slice, like a real New Yorker. The walls of the room were covered with Charlotte's sketches of Aurora and Thad working on the project, a visual timeline of their growing bond. During dinner, Maria pulled Thad aside to show him something on her tablet. The Eleanor Grace Foundation's first major success story. They had helped reunite a young mother with her teenage son after 12 years of separation. The mother had been forced to give him up due to financial hardship, and the foundation had provided the resources and legal support to bring them back together. Thad stared at the photo of the reunited family, their joy reflecting his own journey. "Uncle Thad," Aurora called out, interrupting his thoughts. "Can we do the thing now?" He nodded, reaching into his briefcase. Together, they presented Charlotte with a set of keys and an iPad showing photos of a beautiful brownstone just a few blocks from both Aurora's school and Thad's office. The house had everything they had talked about: a studio space for Charlotte's graphic design work, a basement workshop for Aurora's projects, and plenty of room for family dinners and weekend gatherings. Charlotte started to protest again about it being too much, but Aurora cut her off. "Mom, Uncle Thad said we're not allowed to say no because it's not really for us. It's for him too. He's going to need somewhere to store all his science stuff when he comes over to help me with projects. His penthouse is getting too crowded with my experiments." The adults laughed, recognizing the clever negotiation tactics Aurora had clearly learned from her uncle. Moving day brought another surprise. When Charlotte and Aurora arrived at the brownstone, they found the entire Blackwood Innovations tech team setting up a state-of-the-art home automation system. The basement workshop rivaled university laboratories, and Charlotte's studio had been equipped with the latest design technology. But it was the living room that brought tears to their eyes. A wall of built-in shelves held framed copies of Eleanor's letters, family photographs, and Aurora's science fair trophy, telling their story from separation to reunion. "There's one more thing," Thad said, leading them to a small garden in the back. There, in a peaceful corner, stood a beautiful memorial fountain. The water flowed over a piece of green glass that caught the light exactly like their distinctive eyes, and a small plaque read, "In memory of Eleanor Grace and James Grace, your love flows through generations." Aurora touched the plaque gently, then hugged Thad with all her might. "Now Mom and I can talk to Dad and Grandma Eleanor whenever we want," she whispered. The media's interest in their story had evolved from tabloid sensation to something more meaningful. The Eleanor Grace Foundation's work had caught the attention of major news outlets, leading to a series of interviews where Thad and Charlotte shared their family story to inspire others. Aurora, with her inherent charm and brilliant mind, became the unexpected face of a movement to support young scientists from non-traditional family backgrounds. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching Aurora demonstrate her latest invention to Maria and Jackson, who had become regular dinner guests, Charlotte showed Thad her latest artwork. It was a series of portraits, Eleanor at different ages created from photographs, James painted from Charlotte's memories, and finally, Thad and Aurora working together in the innovation lab, their matching green eyes focused and bright. "I'm calling it The Legacy of Green Eyes," she said. "It's for a gallery show next month." Thad studied the portraits, particularly struck by how Charlotte had captured the way Eleanor's eyes seemed to hold the same determination he now saw in Aurora. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I spent years thinking these eyes were a curse, something that made me different, marked me as alone. But they were really a beacon guiding me home." Charlotte squeezed his hand. Eleanor used to say the same thing. She called them lighthouse eyes, meant to help lost family find their way back to each other. The sound of laughter drew their attention back to the garden, where Aurora was explaining something complex about solar panels to an entirely bewildered Jackson. Maria caught Thad's eye and smiled knowingly. She'd seen his transformation from a solitary figure into the heart of this unconventional but loving family. The man who once measured his worth in stock prices and market shares now counted his wealth in Friday afternoon science experiments and Sunday family dinners. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Thad sat in his penthouse office reading Eleanor's letters again. He'd read them so many times he had memorized parts, but tonight one passage stood out. "My dearest Theodore, if you're reading this, it means you've finally found your way back to our family. Remember that time lost doesn't have to stay lost. It can become the foundation for something even more beautiful. Your eyes will always guide you home." 1 year after their first meeting in Central Park, Thad stood at his office window, those distinctive jade green eyes now reflecting a very different man. Blackwood Innovations had transformed from a cold tech giant into a family-friendly corporation that other companies sought to emulate. The Eleanor Grace Foundation had helped reunite dozens of families and supported hundreds of single mothers in pursuing their dreams. But his greatest achievement sat on his desk, a Father's Day card from Aurora that read, "To the best Uncle Dad ever." The company's annual charity gala, once a formal showcase of corporate power, had been reinvented as a family-focused celebration. This year's theme was The Eyes of Innovation, inspired by Aurora's successful line of solar-powered educational toys. Her science fair project had evolved into a full product line under Blackwood's new educational division. Charlotte's Legacy of Green Eyes portraits hung prominently in the ballroom, telling their family story to all who attended. Harrison and Margaret Grace were there too, slowly earning their place back in the family through genuine remorse and changed hearts. They'd established a scholarship fund in Eleanor's name at Boston University, where she had dreamed of studying before her pregnancy changed everything. Aurora had helped design the application process, insisting that it should focus on dreamers who never give up, just like Grandma Eleanor. Maria, now promoted to Chief of Community Relations, oversaw both the foundation and the company's family-friendly initiatives. Jackson had become Aurora's unlikely mentor in business mathematics, spending his free time teaching her about investment strategies for her future company, which she'd already named Green Eyes Innovations, much to everyone's amusement. That evening, as Thad left his office early for his regular Friday family dinner, he stopped at the park where it had all begun. The playground where he'd first seen Aurora was now being renovated, funded by the Eleanor Grace Foundation, to include accessible equipment and an educational solar power display. A small plaque would read, "Where family finds family and every pair of eyes holds a story." At home, the brownstone had become more home than his penthouse. Aurora was excitedly showing Charlotte her latest invention while dinner cooked. She'd created a small desktop fountain that used recycled materials and solar power, inspired by Eleanor's memorial in their garden. "Look, Uncle Thad," she called out as he entered. "I made it so the water catches the light just like our eyes." As they sat down to dinner, Thad looked around at his family. The sister-in-law who had become a sister, the niece who had become like a daughter, the memory of a mother and brother he'd never known but whose love had somehow guided him here. He understood now what Eleanor had meant in her final letter. Family isn't just in the blood or in the eyes, it's in the choices we make every day to love, to forgive, to grow, and to cherish each other. Their story had become more than just a tale of lost family found. It was a testament to the power of love across generations, the strength of a mother's hope, and the amazing ways that life can bring healing when you least expect it. Through their distinctive green eyes, Eleanor's legacy lived on, not just in their matching gaze, but in their shared determination to make the world a better place for families everywhere. If you've been touched by this story, please take a moment to share it with others who might need a reminder that it's never too late for family, healing, and love. Don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own family reunion stories. Every story of connection matters. And if you'd like to support more content like this, you can use YouTube's Super Thanks feature to help us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful family moments come from the most unexpected places. You just have to keep your eyes open to see them.